Hey everybody, today we are going to learn a little bit more about UV mapping, and in this special lesson I really want to focus on mapping something that's organic. So I want to really go and try to model some rocks. Previously we've been modeling things like cubes, and you can see that these cubes are not exactly the best kind of modeling for organic things. These are very linear, they're very sharp. So what we're going to do is model rocks. Now, we could go ahead and model rocks out of a sphere. Now, the reason I say avoid spheres for modeling rocks is basically because of these triangles at the top. And the triangles, when we go to smooth it in the game engine, they will work, but the UVing will become extremely difficult. We know this by going to the UV editor and seeing these jagged edges at the top. These tend to not be the most beneficial methods when you're modeling. So I'm going to model a rock, ironically, out of a cube, and we'll talk about that more in detail as we go forward. So let's start with this cube, and what we're going to need for this cube is to model it in smooth mesh mode. Now you remember, 1 on your keyboard shows the linear mode, 2 shows the smooth mode, and 3 shows just the smooth preview mode. So we're going to start with the number 2 key on your keyboard. And let me open up some real estate here and get to work. All right, so I have this attempt at a rock. Now obviously it is not a rock, but it's going to get me a nice spherical shape when I convert it. So I want you guys to go to Modify, and I want you to go down to Convert and go to Smooth Mesh Preview to Polygons. I'm going to go ahead and click Smooth Mesh Preview to Polygons, and it's going to go ahead and give me a really nicely balanced, and let's turn the wireframe unshaded on, a really nicely balanced model. So you see there's no n-gons. It's a pretty good starting point for our model. So now I'm going to just kind of deform it in a manner that it's not a perfect sphere, and I can start kind of pushing and pulling vertices. And we're not looking for extreme realism here. I'm just looking for essentially a demo for you guys to get the idea of how to do something organic. Now we've learned multiple methods of modeling here, from extrusion to beveling to appending polygons to adding faces to subtracting faces, you name it. The ultimate goal is whatever tool you use, try to think of what this object would look like in real life. So in real life, this object would obviously not be perfect. This mesh would be kind of jaggedy. And what I like to do is I like to start by just going around and kind of messing up the uniformity of the actual rock. Now, where this is not essentially a modeling tutorial, you can see that we still need to pay close attention to the elements in our scene, because we don't want somebody to simply look at our model and say, oh, well, he just has a sphere there. That's all he did. Let's delete that vert there, or not delete it, but move it. All right, so when we get a certain point, what I like to do is I like to go ahead and add more divisions, and that will start getting me kind of a boulder-esque shape. And then I can hop to my other tools we've learned, for instance, the sculpting tool. So I can take my sculpt tool and double-click on it, and remember the mouse button will allow us to kind of adjust sizes and strengths and things like that. So left and right will adjust the size and so forth. So we got to actually have a very small size for this because we are using a little bit more strength, using a kind of a small rock. If you're like unsure, just make your rock bigger in the sense of just go through and make it a little larger. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just kind of hold my control key down and push and pull randomly. Try to get rid of some of these corner edges for sure. That's going to help immensely. If I hold the control key down, in this case, it pulls out my material. If I let go of the control key, it pushes in my material. And I'm going to kind of go through here and just pull and push and make this look hopefully more boulder-like and rock-like. It's not going to look perfect, but that's okay. So there we go. And definitely down here, this rock's going to have some little bit of things. So if I want to make my magnitude, I use my middle mouse button and I can lower that magnitude. Now, at any point here, as we're going on and making our boulder, we can go ahead and just simply go to add divisions, and we could double or triple our geometry. And so that's going to really help us. We can then go back to our mesh tools and our sculpt tool, and maybe go back and hit a smooth tool. And that smooth tool, if you don't want a jaggedy rock, will really, kind of start to get that organic nature back into play. Now, from your experience in UV mapping, you're probably thinking, holy moly, this is going to take, a long time to kind of figure out this puzzle piece here. This is no longer just a simple cube. And so I'm going to give you some quick tools to kind of do that and whatnot. So you saw I actually just held down my right mouse button, and it gave me my last tools. It also gives me my grab tool, so I can kind of grab these areas. That's really cool because when you're in sculpting mode, it will allow you to do that. There also are other tools that we really haven't talked about. For instance, like the scrape tool, for instance, that will kind of flatten areas. So some rocks have like faces, obviously, so you can flatten those areas there. You do have a physical flatten tool too. So let's go in and let's make the size not 15, because that would really, as we know, kind of mess with our thing. And we can go in and flatten some areas. So again, use any tool you think works. It's up to you. I kind of just go and hit them with all the tools until I get what I want. All right, let's go back to object mode and click away. And we can see, with the exception of this little fella right here, which I have to fix, just the perfectionist in me is coming out here, and that little guy right there, I have a pretty organic shape. And so what do we do with this organic rock shape? Well, I want my rock to actually not be as round. I want it to be kind of skinny and long and oval, just like a boulder that kind of fell down. And maybe we'll shrink it a little bit too. There we go. That's a nice little shape. All right. So when we get to this point, we have to now start thinking about UVs. And our UVs are going to be extremely important when it comes to dealing with the texture of this. So let's look at the UV editor and see what we have. But let's do it a little bit different of a way. So some of you are trying to manage all your spaces. So first I'm going to quickly delete my history. So I'm going to delete by type history. And when I delete this history, we can go ahead and go to, let's save it too, just in case. So we don't have to model a rock again. So rock, there we go, student version, yes please. And now what we can do is kind of start the UV process. So let's look at the UV editor in a new way. Let's open up our 2-view mode. So I'm going to open up where the outliner used to be, or is. Go to panels, and what we can do is actually put in our UV editor in this panel. So some people actually like this method because it kind of makes you have both panels up, and I can close my channel box. So we're going to turn, again, off our grid, and we're going to turn on our image and turn on our item right here. We do need to apply a shader to this. We could use the default test grid, and you can see it doesn't look terrible when I click on it. It's not, it's not perfect, but there are definitely some things going on that you're going, okay, like, yeah, look at that area, or look at, there's some seams everywhere. So I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to use the good old UV test grid. So you remember, if you go to Google, and you have this on your course page, but if we go to UV test grid, why do I keep writing grib? Oh well. Go to UV test grid and you look, and you got all these numbers and bright things. I don't like the bright ones personally. I like stuff that's like really down home and desaturated and whatnot. If I can't find the one I provided for you, I'll just pick a random one. This one's fine. It's not my favorite, but I like the gray one better. But I'll save this image and I'll call it test grid. So shout out to the person who made this. It says free, so it's probably not royalty free. But in our case, we're going to just not render it. We're going to just use it for our reference. So let's go ahead and assign a new material, and let's pick a good old Lambert. And in our Lambert, let's load a file texture, and let's find that image. and that image is test grid. Now, what happened is when I saved it off, it forgot to add the extension, which Max sometimes will do. I believe it was a JPEG. It sure was. There it is. All right, great. So now that should show up. Let's go to desktop, test grid. Great. So we'll hit 6, and we'll see that we have kind of our test grid going here. Now, I'm going to close my attribute editor to maximize my space again, and I'm going to kind of zoom in here so I have my 2 windows. These are not squares. They're supposed to be squares, so we have some options. Now, to lay this out, if we simply did an automatic map, we would have tons of puzzle pieces. Now, we could stitch these together. It's given us a pretty good starting point, but you can see, let me turn off my wireframe on shaded, you can see that it's pretty jacked up though. So what I really want to do is I want to work with a new method. And there's going to be some tricks in here, even if you don't use this method, and this is good for organic objects, that I think you'll really be surprised with, that will work with all the methods we've used. So for instance, we used to do planar mapping, and when we would go to planar mapping, we'd have to hit the option box and we'd have to check these. And I wanted you guys to be aware of this in my original UV lessons, but now let me show you the shortcut. So right now you can see that I want to take a picture of the whole object all the way through it in this axis. Now this axis is X. If you look down here at this little crosshair and I turn it, that axis is pointing where we're looking. So to planar map it, I'm going to hold Shift on my keyboard and right click, and this is how we used to extrude and weld and things, but we're going to go to mapping and look at that, planar map X. And we have cylindrical, we have automatic, but we can go boom. And we're going to take a picture of this straight on. Now let's notice what's happening. I'll hit W to get out of that mode. What it did was take a picture and flatten it, and it's all purple because I turned on my purple items, because this shows us the overlapping UVs. Now we want this not to be this pinkish purple. We want it to be actually a richer purple like we've seen up here. So we can see we have a lot of distortion, a lot of overlapping UVs when I turn on some of the other methods. This is step 1. So step 1 is to take a flat picture of your organic object. Step 2 is to dictate where you want the seam. So where do we want to put this seam? Well, I'm going to put mine right down the middle. It's going to be a little easier for you guys to see this way. So for demo's sake, I'll do it this way. But I'm going to grab my edge, and I may hit 5 when I grab my edge. It's a little easier. And I can actually do a little double click method to speed the process along. And I'm going every few. I don't get lazy and try it all the way down. So I'm going to go all the way down. This is where it's going to actually make a seam for me. Got lazy there. All right, so I don't go all the way around. I went about a little, almost a third of the way down the front, and then I stitched it all the way down to here. That's where my seam is going to end, because I want to fillet this, and I want to actually flatten it out. So what we're going to do, we have another method we have to do. So first step is to planar map it to get it just flat. The second step, and this doesn't always work, but is to right-click, holding your Shift key, and go to Cut UVs. So hold Shift and then right-click with your edges selected that you want the seam to be, and cut those UVs. These are going to be where you're going to see a noticeable seam, so be aware of that. You may want to do this, and we'll do it again, but you may want to do this under your model. So when I cut my UVs, I'm going to right-click and go back to UV mode and highlight everything. Now here's the cool part. I'm going to hold Shift, click, and I'm going to use the unfold function. And immediately what you're going to see is something kind of special. It actually unfolds everything per the seam we selected. Now let's go ahead and hit 6 and see what we got. Well, we have some good squares, but we don't have all the good squares we need. So that's something that we need. And I'm not a huge fan of this test grid, so bear with me for 1 second. I'm going to replace this with my good old UV test grid. Let me find where's stuff. I have mine hidden. It's just what I do. I hide things where I can't find them. There's the good old UV test grid. Welcome back. I can see it a little better now. But you can see that the majority of this is actually, you can see where the seam is. You guys see that? But it did pretty well. Now, we can fix this even further by going to UVs again, highlighting everything, holding shift, and now go to the bottom to smooth UV tool. Now when you have that happen, you get a little unfold and relax tool. And if you click on the words and actually move it, now relax it gets a little bit wonky, but unfold will actually take the distortion out of your object. And you see we do have that seam. So what we would need to do is hide that seam. But overall, if we hide that seam, you can see most of the things are in perfect distortion. So, and it flattened it where you could paint it. So you get to choose where you hide your seam. So if you wanted to hide your seams down here, you could just draw a line at the bottom of your rock where no one would see it, and then everything else would be perfect except underneath, and you would be fine. Overall, though, you can see where this could be a huge thing. We'll pretend this part of the wall of rock is on the back of the wall. Let's go ahead and add a texture. Let's replace this with, I have a great rock texture here. And let's see what we got. So now you can see it looks pretty good. Now you do see the seam, but I told it to draw the seam there, didn't I? So that's what we would have to be careful with, that seam. Now how long you make that line is up to you. The more information Maya has, the better you can do the seam with it. But let's go ahead and let's automatic map this again. Let's go back to our test grid. And let's see if we drew another seam, what it would look like. We can use our method here and hold Shift and go to automatic map to cut it back up. Go back to object mode. We're going to, let's flip this rock here. Let's turn it to Z mode. And let's planar map in Z. So hold Shift, mapping Z. That takes a picture. Now let's dictate where it's going to cut this rock. So if this is the bottom, I'm going to go to edge mode. I'm going to hit 5 so I can actually see what I'm doing. And let's cut just a little bit of a seam. And let's see if this is enough for it to deem a proper worry-free unfold. So my seam is hidden underneath. You can see that. So I'm going to go ahead and hit cut. So I'm going to hold Shift. Cut's also right here. It's a little X-Acto knife. Right-click, cut UVs. I'm going to go to UV then, highlight everything. Now, this may not work. We may not have enough area. So let's try unfold. And we can see what happens now is we're getting way more distortion than we need. Maybe we didn't have enough seam down here for it to dictate where we're going. Let's try the right-click smooth UV tool and see if this will help us. So go and grab all the UVs you want to smooth. Now you could just grab like a handful if need be. But we're going to grab all of them because we really kind of messed it up. And look at this. Wow. So you can go and smooth out your UVs. Now when we look at this, you go, okay, we got some interesting stuff here. We'd have to see what the texture looks like. So I'm going to run that texture one more time and put that flint on it. And let's see if we notice anything. We do have some blurriness where the texture is actually, it's probably a little smaller in resolution, so you have to be careful of that. But overall, you probably couldn't even tell that that is distorted. You can see it is blurring it because these are different sizes. So if you didn't want that to happen, you can simply go to UVs and grab the middle UVs, and then you can proceed to maybe relax those, unfold those, and you know, it's still a work process, but it gets you a pretty nice result. So to do this step by step would have been an absolute nightmare if you guys remember the other methods that we did. So this is a quick way to kind of start to figure out how to unfold objects and get really nice texture maps that you can do polygons, UV snapshot, and then export, and then we can paint these on and kind of paint cracks and other things in our actual scene. So that's all I got for you today on this one. Hopefully you enjoy it and you apply this or attempt this method to help you speed on your UV methods.